It was a kind of neighborhood where lawns stayed clipped, cars didn't linger in driveways, and folks waved more out of obligation than friendliness. You know the type, suburbia with a secret competitive streak. People whisper behind curtains and hid pettiness behind HOA newsletters. That's where I lived, just trying to enjoy the peace and quiet, until they made me the enemy. I didn't look like most of them, wasn't raised here, didn't dress like them, and sure didn't walk on eggshells. But I kept to myself, pay my dues, smile when I passed people walking their golden retrievers. Still, it wasn't enough. The HOA president, Janet Bellamy, made sure of that. Thin smile, thick binder, and a voice that could freeze milk. First, it was the mailbox being too modern. Then the flower bed wasn't regulation. And every time I tried to ask questions, she cut me off with that same little smirk, like she already decided what kind of man I was. And the rest of the board just nodded along. I was tolerated, at best, until the day they stood in court, smug, shoulders high, thinking they'd finally run me out for good. Well, they didn't know. I just accepted a position. Regional HOA director, their new boss. And when I walked into that courtroom in a tailored suit, watching their jaws drop like bricks, it was better than any verdict could ever be. You want to hear how it got to that point? Stick around. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And brace yourself, because these people had no idea what they were messing with. It started small. That's how they like to do it. Slow, quiet, under the radar. The first letter was about my garbage bins, not pulled in by 10 a.m. I laughed it off, figured it was just Janet being herself. But then it came again, this time with a $50 fine stapled to it. The third one accused me of blocking the sidewalk with my car. Except, I don't park on the street. I checked my doorbell footage. Nothing. Nobody walked by. Nothing was blocked. But still, the fine showed up in my mailbox the next morning like clockwork. That's when I started documenting. Taking pictures, screenshots, timestamps, everything. I even installed a second security cam just to watch the front curb. And wouldn't you know it, a week later, I caught one of the board members, Gary, staging it. He parked halfway into my driveway for 3 minutes, took a picture, then drove off. Sent that same photo in with a complaint the next day. That was their game, fabricating violations, bullying with paperwork. And because they had the backing of the HOA, no one questioned it. I tried going to a board meeting, brought my photos, played the footage. Janet didn't even blink. "We appreciate your concern," she said, "but the board has already voted." Just like that. Dismissed. No one asked to see the proof. No one spoke up. And I'll never forget the look on her face. Calm, pleased, like she wanted me angry. And honestly, it worked. I left that meeting with my blood boiling, gripping my phone like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. That's when I realized this wasn't negligence. It was a campaign. They wanted me gone, and they weren't afraid to cheat to make it happen. I wasn't raised to let people walk all over me. So that night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and every letter they'd ever sent me, spread out like evidence in a crime scene. I wasn't just mad, I was focused. You could almost hear the gears grinding in my head. I pulled up the HOA bylaws, highlighted every vague line they'd tried to twist into a weapon. They wanted to play official? Fine. I'd fight them on their own turf. The next morning, I showed up at the HOA office. No warning, no appointment, just me, the folder, and the truth. The receptionist, bless her, looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Janet's in a meeting," she stammered. I just nodded. "She'll want to cancel it." 10 minutes later, I was in the boardroom. Janet sat there with her legs crossed and her hands folded neatly in her lap, like she was posing for a magazine. "We prefer residents submit concerns in writing," she said, barely looking up. I set the folder down in front of her. "Then consider this my submission." Her fingers twitched when she saw the photos. Gary caught in the act, time-stamped and clear. "This is doctored," she said quickly. "Fake." "Then call the police," I said. "Let's make it official." That's when she knew I wasn't bluffing. For a moment, the room went still. Not silent, still, like even the air was waiting to see what came next. But then she straightened, smoothed her skirt, and said, "We'll review it at the next board meeting." Translation? She needed time, not to check facts, to regroup, and I walked out of there knowing one thing for certain. This wasn't over. It had just gone from passive-aggressive to straight-up war. The board meeting came and went with no mention of my folder. Not a word. They skipped right past new business, like it didn't even exist. I sat there in that folding chair, surrounded by neighbors who barely looked my way, and waited for anyone, to bring it up. But Janet, she smiled like I was invisible, like none of it mattered. And Gary, that man had the nerve to sit across from me, like nothing happened. That's when it clicked. They weren't just ignoring me. They were daring me to push back harder. So I did. I filed a formal complaint, not just with the HOA, but with the city, zoning violations, misuse of fines, discriminatory practices. Because let's be honest, they didn't treat everyone in the neighborhood like this. There were folks with peeling paint and overgrown shrubs who never got so much as a warning. But me, I so much as left my porch light on too late, and it was a federal case. I knew what this was. They didn't say it out loud, but I saw in the way they whispered when I walked by, the way they flinched when I held eye contact too long. I wasn't what they pictured when they thought, neighbor. And Janet, she hated that she couldn't control me. The next week, I got a citation for unauthorized modifications. For what? A bird feeder. Said it was a safety hazard. The same kind every other house on the block had. That's when I knew this wasn't just targeted. It was coordinated. I took it down. Not because I had to, but because I was done playing defense. Let them come. I had something they didn't expect. Patience. And a plan. They thought I'd crack under pressure, but I'd grown up knowing how to survive in places where I wasn't welcome. That wasn't new. What was new was how much they underestimated who I really was. The plan started with a phone call, not to a lawyer. Not yet. First, I called my old mentor, Mr. Daniels. He used to be a district manager for HOA compliance across 3 counties. Retired now, but sharp as ever. I told him everything. Laid it all out like a bad confession. He didn't say much until I was done. Then he said, "Sounds like Janet's running her own little fiefdom. But you know what kills a crooked HOA faster than a lawsuit?" I waited. Paperwork. Real, state-level, bureaucratic paperwork. Turns out, there's a whole chain of oversight most people don't even know exists. State housing commissions, property standards bureaus, and, most important, regional directors. The folks above the HOA. Mr. Daniels made a few calls, put in a recommendation, said he knew a guy who could bring order to a disorderly board. That guy was me. See, what Janet didn't know, and what made me laugh the second Mr. Daniels offered it, was that I'd already been in talks for a new position. I'd applied on a whim a month earlier. Never expected to hear back. But now, with Daniels pulling strings and receipts stacked in my favor, the job was mine. Regional HOA director, overseer of 14 neighborhoods, including hers. And that's when I stopped reacting and started watching. Carefully, quietly. I attended meetings like nothing had changed. Took notes. Let them lie right to my face. Let them file more bogus violations. Because what they didn't know, what made it so sweet, was that every smug look, every dismissive gesture, every fake complaint was going into my file now. They thought they were documenting me, but I was documenting them. And soon enough, they'd learn what it felt like to be powerless under a rule book they no longer controlled. I'd be lying if I said it didn't get to me. The whole thing. The quiet isolation, the sideways glances, the fake smiles that dropped the second my back was turned. It wears on you. Every trip to the mailbox felt like a walk through enemy territory. Even the nice ones, the neighbors who once waved or chatted about the weather, started keeping their distance, like just knowing me was a liability. It wasn't just an HOA fight anymore. It was social exile. I watched my street change. Conversations that used to happen in driveways moved inside. Kids who used to sell me cookies started skipping my house. There was one night, late quiet, when I saw Janet standing at the end of my lawn, just staring, didn't say a word. Just turned and walked away when I opened the door. That kind of thing gets under your skin, makes you question yourself, makes you wonder if it's worth it. And then I got the letter, typed anonymous, slipped into my mailbox with no stamp. One sentence, "You don't belong here." That was it. No signature, no return address, just those 5 words. And for a split second, I felt it, the weight of it, the history in a sentence like that. Because people like me, we've been hearing that for generations. In schools, on sidewalks, in neighborhoods where every house looks the same and none of them look like you. But then I laughed, not out of joy, out of clarity, because that letter told me everything I needed to know. They were scared, not of me yelling, not of me fighting, but of me winning, of me standing tall in a place they thought they owned. And that's when I stopped playing nice, because I wasn't just going to win this thing. I was going to burn their little rule book to the ground. The moment that letter landed in my hand, something inside me settled, cold and clear. I wasn't fighting for peace anymore. I was fighting for truth. And if they wanted war, I'd give them one. But not with fists, with facts, with process, with power. I went to work like a man on a mission because I called Daniels again, told him I was ready to move forward with the position. Within days, I had the paperwork, official onboarding, conflict of interest disclosures, and the title, Regional HOA Oversight Director, which meant I didn't just have authority, I had jurisdiction over Janet, over Gary, over every little tyrant on that board who thought rules were for everyone else. But I kept it quiet. For now, I wanted them to feel comfortable, bold. I wanted them to keep talking in whispers, stacking violations, tightening the leash, because every move they made now was one step closer to their own undoing. Behind the scenes, I assembled my case, not just for a personal complaint, but for a full audit. I started collecting stories from other residents, folks who've been fined unfairly, ignored, or pressured into silence. Turns out I wasn't alone, not even close. There were families who got fined for having bikes on their porches, single moms harassed about fence paint, retirees penalized for yard signs that disrupted uniformity. Janet's reign wasn't just personal, it was systemic. So I gave them my email, quietly, privately, and the stories flooded in. They called her Queen Janet behind closed doors. And when I read the stories line by line, I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't just going to be a reprimand. It was going to be a reckoning. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening. Just another quarterly HOA board review, except this time I was the one reviewing. Word hadn't spread yet. Janet and her crew walked into that rec center like royalty, laughing, handing out stale cookies, shaking hands like they were running for office. They had no idea what was waiting for them. I let the meeting start. Sat in the back at first, quiet, watching. Let them run their little agenda. Community garden updates, mailbox regulations, a motion to ban inflatable decorations. Then, right as they were about to adjourn, I stood up. "Before you close," I said, stepping forward, "I have some findings to present." Janet looked up confused, lips curling into a half smile. "And you are?" I set the file on the table, opened it. Regional HOA Oversight Director, assigned last week. I'm here on behalf of the State Compliance Board. The silence hit like thunder. Janet's face dropped so fast, it was almost comical. Gary looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. The rest of the room? Frozen. Curious. Then I started reading, line by line, the fake fines, the discriminatory enforcement, the violations of code, the complaints, names redacted, but each story hitting harder than the last. I spoke calmly, methodically, like I'd rehearsed it 100 times. When I finished, I looked right at Janet. "You've been found in breach of at least 9 policy regulations. Pending further investigation, you are to step down immediately. Effective now." She tried to speak, stammered something about misunderstanding, about contributing to the community. But her voice cracked under the weight of it. "This isn't personal," I said, standing tall. "It's accountability." She stood, shaking, face red, but she didn't argue. She left, and the room, quiet at first, then slowly, applause, not loud, but real, because in that moment they knew the tyrant had fallen. The aftermath was quiet, almost eerily so. No more citations showed up in my mailbox. No letters about bird feeders or trash bins. The HOA office sent out an official notice a few days later. Janet Bellamy had voluntarily resigned from her position, citing personal reasons. No mention of the audit. No mention of me. But the neighborhood knew. They always know. For the first time in months, I walked down my street without feeling like a target. People nodded again. Some even smiled. Richard, the guy with the flagpole drama from last year, shook my hand and said, "About damn time." Even a couple 2 doors down, who'd always pretended not to see me, dropped off banana bread with a note. "Thanks for standing up. We were scared to." Funny how fast fear turns to admiration when the dust settles. But not everything fixed itself overnight. There were folks who still looked at me with that guarded glance, like they were unsure whether I was a villain or the hero. I didn't blame them. That's the thing about neighborhood politics. It stains everyone differently. But I didn't need their approval. I had my peace. My name cleared. My house free from bogus fines and fake violations. That was enough. I kept my new position. Still oversee the region. But I rarely use the title. Only when it matters. Power is not for flexing. It's for protecting. And every once in a while, I walk past Janet's old place. She sold it, moved out a few weeks after everything went down. The new owners, young couple, friendly, invited me over for lemonade the first day they moved in. Didn't ask about the history. Didn't need to, because the story had already changed. I used to think silence was peace. That if I just kept my head down, paid my dues, didn't rock the boat, I'd be left alone. But that's not peace. That's permission. And people like Janet, they count on that. On your silence. On your fatigue. On your fear of being the problem. But not anymore. What started as one man fighting a $50 trash fine turned into something bigger. Something louder. A reminder that justice doesn't always wear a badge or bang a gavel. Sometimes, it wears work boots and walks out the mailbox every morning knowing the system is rigged, but showing up anyway. I still live in that house. Same address, same porch light, same bird feeder, still hanging, by the way, but it feels different now. It's not just a house. It's proof. Proof that people can change the narrative. That bullies lose when someone finally says no. The neighborhood's better now. A little more honest. People speak up. They share stories. They hold the board accountable. Not because I told them to, because they saw it happen. They watched someone they ignored or doubted or underestimated stand up and win. Every so often, someone still asks me how I stayed so calm, how I didn't snap, how I managed to play the long game. Simple. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. And now, I've got that. Not from everyone, but from the people who matter, from the ones who saw me, finally, not as the outsider, but as a guy who stood his ground when it counted. So no, this wasn't just about a corrupt HOA president. It was about planting a flag, quietly, firmly, and letting the world know I'm not going anywhere.